take a risk, go do something, and keep following it, even if people tell you you can't.
All right. So, welcome to the You Are a Lawyer podcast. Mark Christopher Fava, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be with you.
I'm so excited to talk to you and share all of your experience with the audience. Would you tell everyone a little bit about you?
Sure. I was a military brat. Right? Dad was in the Navy. We moved to Charleston. I went to high school, obviously, in Charleston, and then went to Chapel Hill undergrad, Navy ROTC, 6 years active duty in the Navy. Decided I wanted to go to law school at that point and made one of those big transition decisions. And was very fortunate that I ended up being an aviation lawyer. And that's what I've been doing for like the past 20 or 30 years now.
Yeah. So, I need a little bit more detail because even though
Yeah.
you were a military kid, what was it that inspired you to do ROTC and then?
Yeah. It's so funny because uh, I know you're a parent, but I had an older sibling a year ahead of me, a younger sister a year behind me. So they have two sons and one daughter, and you can understand the financial impact of college. So Dad said, "Look, you want to go out of state, you got to get a scholarship. Otherwise, you're going to either Clemson or South Carolina. Both were great schools." But I did a quick tour at Chapel Hill, and they had a Navy ROTC program. And it seemed to be a very, very nice fit. So I was like, well, you know what? Process of elimination, I'll go up there. So,
Okay.
and at the time, the head of the ROTC program at the University of South Carolina was a Marine, and I got up there and saw it, and he was barking commands. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. You're going to stand the watch. I'm like, oh, I don't think this is for me. So I went to Chapel Hill.
I love that. Okay. And thank you for your service. We
Thank you.
appreciate that. Yeah, of course. So, okay, aviation lawyer. I could see if you were in the Air Force and then you
Yeah.
switched, but you were in the Navy. So, what was it that inspired you about this? Did you grow up playing with airplanes? Like, where did that part come from?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by planes. I was the kid, on Sunday afternoon, Dad would drive us out there, and we'd sit at the end of the runway before you could, before the TSA, they allowed you to just park there and just
Yeah.
watch planes. Loved going to air shows. And when I went into the ROTC, it was the same thing. The Navy has really four branches. You've got naval air, you've got submarines, you've got ships, and the Marine Corps. If you want to call the Marine part of the Navy, they don't like us doing that, but they are. They're part of the Navy. And again, process of elimination. I liked being on ships, but boy, those folks work incredibly hard. Submarines. I spent a week on a submarine underwater, and the metal was clinking and clanking. And I said, I'm a little bit claustrophobic for this, so I ended up going in planes and being in the back of a P3, which was just a lot of fun during the Cold War. We're flying around the world tracking Soviet submarines. So that's where
Yeah.
the passion continued.
Okay. Mark, one of the things I'm really enjoying is that you are talking about these things because you've lived them, but in a very common way. Deciding, oh, I think I'll just be a pilot. I'll do the
Yeah.
aviation part. Were people around you surprised? Were they shocked? Or were they like, that makes sense? Yeah, I could see that
Yeah.
from him.
Yeah, and now just to be clear, I was in the back of the plane, so I started as a navigator, and then I moved over to the sort of the tactical part. We had
Okay.
three pilots in the plane, so I never actually flew, but I always flew in the
Okay.
plane. I've got about 3,000 hours in the back. Don't want people to think I'm saying I was a pilot. Some of my best friends are pilots, but yeah, I think some people were surprised. I mean, my mom was like, "Why in the world would you want to get on that plane, fly around the world, fly a couple hundred feet over the ocean, 1,000 miles away from land?" It's well because it
Yeah.
was exciting, right? And I just really, really enjoyed it.
Okay. I think that definitely would be exciting. We went to Belize last summer,
Ooh,
and that was the first time that I was on a small passenger, like 6-person plane. And it was the one that has like the floaties at the bottom because you're flying over water. And I was
yeah,
like, oh, the ocean is like right there. like like right there.
very close. Yeah, yeah. We did that a couple of years ago. We used to go to Boston and then take a ferry to Nantucket for summer vacation with our three girls. One year, I taught my wife into flying, and she said never again because it's a little bitty plane. We were bumping all over the place. We're going on the ferry next time.
Yes. It's the same water, but the being in the air versus the ferry is very, very different. Very different.
Looks a lot different.
Yes. All right, cool. So, Mark, you are an aviation lawyer. I
Right.
mean, my mind is spinning because, first of all, aviation law sounds incredible. But I mean, aviation law will have HR, it'll have compliance, it'll have
Yes.
all kinds of things. What do you enjoy about being an aviation lawyer?
If you're in the field of aviation, you've got to be ready for the ups and downs, right? I got to Delta Airlines 41 days before 9/11. I told my wife it was going to be just a relaxing corporate job. And, the next thing, all hell broke loose, right? And all of our lives changed. And to some extent, over the last couple of years of my current employer, it has been a lot of up and downs and challenges. But if you like being around planes, you like people that fly planes, you like the mechanics that work on planes, there's just no cooler place to be. And I tell lawyers that all the time: find what your passion is, pursue that, and align it with the law, right? And you're right. There's aviation finance, there's aviation compliance, there's HR. I mean, it's just not this small knothole.
Right. Because when I think aviation law, I'm thinking, are you making sure that you're compliant with like landing and stuff? Because I'm just thinking about the way that planes fly. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
even in preparing for this, I'm like, no, there's so many different things, right? Any aspect you would have with a business, I'm sure you have that with an aviation company as well. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It's not unlike any other big company, especially if you're in-house. So when I was at the law firm, it was mostly helping clients with regulatory compliance, right? With the FAA rules with respect to how do you operate your plane, how do you service and maintain your plane, pilot training, flight attendant training, and whether or not you're compliant with those. But then also aviation accidents, so anytime there's an accident, lawyers are going to be involved, especially when I was at the law firm. But when you get into a corporation, you're right, you've got everything. You've got all the same things you just mentioned.
yeah. So a lot of guests that come on the show, they talk about switching practice groups, changing areas. Within aviation law, have you moved around or have you pretty much done the same thing or been with the same practice group?
No, definitely moved around. So at the law firm, I started doing mostly accidents and incidents, small airplane accidents and incidents. When I went to Delta, I was working on FAA compliance. So if we got an allegation that, somebody wasn't doing the right thing, altitude deviation, the planes weren't being maintained properly, I would defend the company or negotiate with the FAA. So there you're sort of switching into regulatory law. And the other very, very interesting thing about being with the air carrier is obviously passenger complaints. So anytime there was a passenger injury or complaint, I would work with our risk manager and outside counsel to really try and resolve it and make it right. And then when I got to my current employer, it's more so focused on building the plane, aviation manufacturing, because we started this factory now in Charleston about 14 years ago, and there was nothing here. So that's really what I started doing. And the job has taken another twist in the last couple of years. So
Yeah. Aviation manufacturing. That's so cool.
yeah, it's phenomenal. So we have this factory that's 10 and a half football fields in square footage. We bring in millions of parts to build a plane, and it comes out being the most beautiful dual aisle, plane that's made of a composite material.
Yeah.
And we've got, a couple of years of backlog for them. People just, all the customers want them. It's a wonderful aircraft.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to switch a little bit. I want to
Sure.
talk about your book that's being published in January 2025. What made you decide to write a book and what is the
Yeah.
book about?
Yeah, thank you. I spent 6 years in the Navy. My last 2 years, I was working for an Admiral. I decided to write the book in the middle of COVID. I've always enjoyed writing. As lawyers, we write a lot anyway. So I said, you know what? I always want to write a book. I'm watching too much TV. Never used to watch TV. I was binging on stupid TV shows like Schitt's Creek and other things. I said, you know what? I got to do something with my time. So I started writing, and it took me 2 years to get it done. And really what I wanted to share with people was how impactful a boss can be, right? So the book is called Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders. And it's the stuff I did for this boss who was an admiral 30 years ago that's been banging around in my head, but I'm convinced those practices helped me out, not only as a naval officer, but also as a lawyer.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated the way that you word things because you're like, I decided to write a book and I'm just going to stop watching TV. So, like, the discipline of that is amazing. It took you 2 years to write the book?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
I love to hear that because I feel like you would sit down and write a book in like a month. So, what is the process for 2 years? What are you going through?
There's three different ways you can do it. You can self-publish, you can work with a hybrid publisher, which is the route I went, or you can work with a traditional publisher. Hybrid publisher is you pay to play, you're paying somebody to publish a product. And, for me, you have a manuscript, you send it to the publisher or the hybrid publisher. They say, yeah, it's something interesting. And then you work just like we would in the law with the editors for 6 to 8 months to really refine it. And the first thing they told me was hilarious. They said, you write too much like a lawyer. You got to stop writing like a lawyer. You got to be more authentic. So, go from 70, 80,000 words to 60, you go back and forth. Am I cutting too much?
Yeah.
And and that's the process. And then you get to design the cover, and then you get to see it in a PDF, and then 6 boxes arrive on your doorstep. So it's been a phenomenal process. You'll see all these things on the internet. It says write a book in 60 days. If you can do that, bless you. Or a quality book. And I'm sure people
Right.
can. But for me and you, I'm fitting that in late at night, off duty hours. I got a job. I got 3 children.
Yeah.
So that. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful process.
Yeah, I was reading something. It said that most novels were like 55,000 to 60,000 words. And so yours was 70, eighty
It
thousand,
started
and
at
you had to cut
70.
it down?
Yeah, they said get rid of it. And that's the wonderful thing about an editor, right? They'll just tell you, look, Mark, no one cares about all this other stuff about you, right? Just you got to cut all that out. And if every word and every sentence doesn't matter to the story or what you're trying to tell to the reader, not to you, you got to get rid of it. So that's really hard. That is probably the hardest thing when you're
Yeah.
trying to figure out, what should stay and what should go.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by this. For one, I want to write children's books because I read to my daughter a lot. And there's
Yes,
so many books. I'm like, they missed the whole point. Or like they had a
absolutely.
point, but it was something else. I was like, oh, somebody has to do this.
No, you got to do it. Look, a year and a half ago, I was at our employers' law conference, and this lawyer buddy of mine, I told him I was writing a book, and he said exactly what you said. He said, "I've always wanted to write a children's book." He has twins. One of them is a special needs child, and one of them is not. So he said, "I want to write a book about how I've raised these two, one with special needs and one with not." And guess what? About a month or two ago, he announced that it's getting ready to be published. So it's like you say, you just okay, you got this thing in your mind. Let me just figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, you just got to do it. Yeah. And but I have lists in my phones, and I've even like outlined it, and then I've started doing
Yeah.
courses. I'm like, just do it, Kyla, because I know I'm going to have a different story. But what I think is fascinating about your story, Mark, is that would you have called yourself a creative person? Like, would
No,
you have told people, hey, I'm a creator?
no. So my first publisher, who published David Goggins' book for me, the sealed
Yeah.
Scribe. Now Scribe has reinvented itself and come back, but the first, what I would call Scribe 1.0, when I went to their author workshop to be accepted in their program in Austin, Texas, the first thing they made you do was you had to go around the room and say, "Hi, I'm Mark Fava. I'm an author." And they're like, "I haven't written anything, but I'm going to just admit it." It's very difficult telling people that thing, but you're right. You really are an artist, and the biggest compliment I've had so far. I've had a couple of people read my book. Now they're friends, so I don't know if they're just being nice to me yet, but they have said, "Mark, it was wonderful. When I read it, I felt like I was in the room with you and the Admiral." And it's just like, wow, because that's was my intention all along. So,
Yeah.
but never thought of myself as an artist. Absolutely not.
Yeah. I think that lawyers are so creative. Like, from the way that we can read case law and then be like,
Yes.
oh, I can make that fit into this case or whatever. I think that all of that is creativity. We just don't think of it as creativity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're spot on because we're forced to do that, right? We're forced to take potentially bad facts and figure out, okay, what's the best way to spin this? So it fits very well into, creative writing. And mine is nonfiction, but I've got a couple friends that have taken that, that even further and written fiction books, which is just phenomenal because that really is a story, right?
Yes. I do book reviews as well, and I do fiction and nonfiction books. And I was putting together a list of of fiction books not written by why can't I think of his name? John Grisham. Because
Oh,
of
yes.
course he writes so much, but there's a ton of
Yes.
lawyers who become fiction authors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've
He's
tapped
written
into being creative.
Absolutely, he's written a ton of them, and he just co-authored one, a nonfiction one about a number, and I just bought it, I haven't read it yet, about a number of people that have been wrongfully convicted and have been 5, 10, 15 years later proven to be innocent. And I think that's going to be a fascinating one. But you're right, when you
Yeah.
pull over the leaf of his book and you look down all the books he's written, you're like, holy smokes! It's just, and they're all bestsellers, right?
I know, all of
Uh,
them. And I think it's fascinating, but adding to the lawyers being creative, we have to be storytellers, whether you go to court or not, right? When you're in that trial prep or mock court or mock trial, when you're in law school, that's teaching you to be a storyteller. How would you do an opening statement? How would you do a deposition? How would you do all that stuff? And like we have all these skills, which but you don't really use them until later. And then you're like,
yes.
oh, that is creative. That's creative too. And that's creative too. So,
Well, that's so funny because when I speak, I got introduced last week about somebody that said he's a great storyteller, and you could see some people in the audience roll their eyes like, "Oh, God!" Storytellers have been around for generations, even before there was written language. There were storytellers, and you can make the biggest impact on people through story. If you come right out and start telling an impactful story, you can. Right when you're a lawyer or you're talking to a jury or an audience, you can immediately tell whether or not you're connecting just by looking at the reaction.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. So, what would you say to like another lawyer who says they want to write a book? Not me. I know you gave me that advice, but
Yeah.
like, how would you inspire them to get started?
I'd say just put your mind to do it. No, it's going to be difficult, like everything we do in life. Don't stop when you hit a hurdle. My first publisher went bankrupt. There was some malfeasance going on there. Thank goodness somebody's come in and cleaned it up, and they're fine. And I'm with a wonderful publisher now. But it's just a long journey, right? And don't let the setbacks get in your way. And then, secondly, incredibly important. Find other people, just like we do in the law, right? Find a mentor, find somebody else that's done it and say, how did you do this? Right. And they'll tell you, you're going to start liking this. You're going to get to the point where it really stinks. Then you're going to hate it. And that's when you're going to want to quit. Right. But you just, and they're right. About, month 8 or 9, you're like going, this is terrible. I'm not getting anywhere. So I think
Yeah.
those are the two most important things. Put your mind to doing it and then find somebody else who's done it that can not only encourage you, but tell you how to do it. And I think that's very important because there are people that are out there and they've done it and they'll commiserate with you and say, yep, been there, done that.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I'm sure, at least for most lawyers, the hardest part is going to be becoming a beginner again,
Yes.
right? Like you've been doing the law, you've been practicing or whatever. And now it's like, but I've never been an author. Oh, I have to be a beginner.
We remember what it was like our first year of legal writing, right? You get that paperback, and I taught legal writing too. And it's just all red everywhere. And same thing when you're an associate, the partner will just chop it all up. Same thing when I got my first manuscript back. There was stuff, there was just big X's on some page. Why is this important? Stop writing like a lawyer. So, and that's what's fascinating about it, right? Because we know we're good writers, but let's just figure out how to do it a different way.
Hmm. Absolutely. I love this. I love it. It's so good. So, Mark, my mind is going with so many questions. Without giving spoilers away for your book, are there lessons from the Admiral that apply to law school and being a lawyer?
Absolutely. One of the other things they say when you write a book, they say, look, who are you writing this book for? Because if you just want to write a book about Mark Fava, no one cares. You've got to find somebody that's going to pick it up and say, oh, this is interesting. This might help me with X, Y, and Z, right? And I said, okay, that makes sense. Anytime I'm in Barnes and Noble or looking on Amazon, I go for a book that I think is going to do what? Help me. So I think for me, the same habits I learned as an admiral's aide transferred almost flawlessly to being a lawyer, right? It's just very simple things: being on time, striving for perfection, like you said, knowing the audience, knowing the people in the room. Very simple concepts, but very important when you want to try and be successful as a lawyer. And so I've had a couple people already, a couple of lawyers read it, and they say, "I'm giving this to my son who's in law school. I'm giving this to my daughter." And again, that's a great compliment because that really is the target audience.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really cool. Do you mind? I want to look something up real quick. There's a book I
No,
did a review on.
sure. I bet you I know
Um,
about it. No problem.
but he talks about like don't change the world, just change 10 people.
Oh, McRaven.
Yes.
Admiral McRaven. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
It was a speech he gave, right? At
A
a graduation and
speech.
commencement. Right. Just make
And
your
then
bed.
he I read that book. I don't remember what I was going through, but I was like, let me find some books about like just getting up and being self-motivated.
Yes.
I love that book. I teach so many lessons from that to my daughter. I'm just like, leave the room better, do this, like little
Yeah.
stuff that she can just take with her.
Yes,
Okay.
phenomenal writer. He's written 2 or 3 more. I have read all of them. I've got, I think I even bought a second copy of Make Your Bed because I think I left the first one on a plane one time. It's like, dadgummit, you too late, left it in the seat back. But phenomenal writer. And, the other interesting thing I told people, I said, look, I worry about this title because I'm not, I don't want them to think it's McRaven because I'm not the Admiral. I'm learning from the Admiral. And they said, don't worry about it. The best thing that can ever happen to you, Mark, is if they pull up your book, they'll see you might also like McRaven's. Better yet, if they pull up McRaven's book, wouldn't it be neat if under his was yours? And I said, okay, now you're talking. So because he's phenomenal, and you talk about a heroic career, who's really been there, done that. Great books, an incredible hero.
Yeah. So I love reading. My YouTube channel that I have, it's book reviews every single Monday. I absolutely love reading. There's a book called Creative Living, and she talks about how you can't think of your creative works as your baby because then you'd have trouble cutting it, right? If
Ah,
you thought of your book as a baby and then you had to cut 30,000 words, you'd be like, I can't cut my baby. What did you tell yourself to get through that process of editing it?
yeah, it was the same thing as when we're lawyers and we're giving people advice that they don't want to hear, right? A partner once told me, you're not paid to tell them what they want to hear. Typically, you're going to be telling them something they don't want to hear. And if they want to hear it, what they want to hear, they can get it from somebody else down the street. So it was the same thing with respect to writing. I went to a publisher. I knew the value of editors, right? Because I'd been on law review. And I wanted people to tell me that. And as hard as it was to take that advice, I'm convinced, look, that's what I'm paying you for, right? I want editors to tell me exactly what you just said. And it is painful when they tell you, Mark, chapter 1, when you talk about how wonderful you were in law school and how you started the Navy, no one cares. Get right to the point. Go right into the first day or the first week you're with the Admiral and what that felt like. And that's where my chapter 1 opens up. It says, this is what happened. He set me down in the chair and he told me these 5 things. And so, look, if you're paying for advice from a professional, you listen to it.
Wow. That's so good. If you're paying for advice from a professional, you listen to it. That's gonna like open up so many like light bulbs for the audience because there's a lot of law students that listen, and then there's a lot of young lawyers, five
Yeah.
years practicing or less, that listen, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, that's right. That partner knows more. That coach
Yeah.
knows more. That therapist knows more." I
Yeah,
love
it's
that.
very hard telling a client what they don't want to hear. These are bad facts. You've got a loser, but that's what we're paid to do. I mean, and that's what you need to do. You got to speak the truth. Because I used to tell clients, I'd say, look, this is what's going to happen, and this is where we're going to be. And if you don't believe me, I'll go the other way. But 2 years from now, you will have spent 6 figures on legal fees, and you're going to be mad at me and say, I still got this problem, and you didn't solve it. I said, I'm going to solve your problem, and I'm going to go to lunch with the other lawyer right now. And they'd say, you're not going to lunch with that guy. So yes, I am, because you got a problem and I'm going to start fixing it over lunch, right? Not only in the courtroom, but
Oh
I'm going
yeah.
to fix it over lunch.
Yeah, it's all about those relationships. That's even a good
Absolutely.
lesson for me as a business owner because if someone's paying you and they don't listen, like almost I'm thinking even like how to identify the clients you want to work with and some that you maybe don't.
Bingo.
Um,
Bingo. When you get to be mature in your practice, and as I became a partner, those clients that wouldn't listen to me, you find a way to exit yourself from that relationship. It's just not worth the money. So the paradigm should be exit your way diplomatically from those relationships and just tell them, look, I just don't think this is going to work if you're not in an active case. And then the people that do like you, that you get results for and do listen to you, you slowly raise your rate. And that makes up for the fact that you exited the people that you didn't want to work with, right? And that were making your
yes,
life miserable.
that's true. This is great advice. I hope it's all in the book.
There's going to be another one, what I learned from the judge and what I learned in the law firm. So those are banging around in my head.
Yay, so exciting.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Mark. So I have just one last question for you, and you've answered it a little bit, but what would you say to a law student or a young lawyer about what they can do with their law degree?
Yeah, you can do whatever you put your mind to, right? Don't let anybody tell you you can't. I was in Charleston for 3 or 4 years. I was with a small defense firm. I was doing car accidents and I was doing railroad accidents. And I wanted to be an aviation lawyer, couldn't break into it. And then a friend of mine, high school buddy relationship, called me up and said, why don't you come work for Delta Airlines? And I said, no, I don't want to do that. But I knew that if I ever wanted to be an aviation lawyer, I had to go do that. So as you talk about, take a risk, go do something and keep following it, even if people tell you you can't. And when I came back from Delta, I came back to the same law firm and I called them up and I said, hey, do you remember me? I'd love to come back to Charleston. My wife wants to come back to Charleston. They said, yeah, I remember you, but we have no work for you. And if you want to come back and start an aviation law practice, come on back. But your salary is going to be this, and it's not going to go up unless you produce. So there's no better investment you can make than investing in yourself because whose tail is on the line, right? And that's, I think, the best advice I'd give any prospective lawyer or law student.
Yeah. You know who tells on the line. And I like to think I know how hard I work as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
So it's also like I can't really control other things, but I know once
Nope.
I get there, I'll perform, and then you guys will give me the raise, and I'll bring in the clients and all this stuff, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and that is in the book. I say somewhere in the book, know everybody in the room, and although I might not be the smartest person in the courtroom or in the boardroom or in the conference room, I will know everybody. I'll know who the decision maker is, and I'll be prepared. And that level of preparedness will outdo the smarter person every single time.
Yes. Oh my goodness, this was so phenomenal, and I know the audience is going to love it. I'm really really enjoying it. And Mark, thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it and can't wait to see it online.
Mark, you have a great day. Talk to you later.
Okay.